Retro.
What's up, guys? This is Daniel Logan, Boba Fett from Attack of the Clones, The Clone Wars, Book of Boba, Skywalker Saga game, and hopefully many more things in the Star Wars galaxy. You are listening to Jay and Dennis on Podcast Stardust. Yep, this is the way I've spoken.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And in this episode, we are going back to Darth Bane. I know what you're thinking. We just talked about Darth Bane last week, but we've crossed the midpoint of this book. And so we are going to be checking back in to kind of talk about things overall with a special guest. And that would be none other than Tricia from the Theme Park Throwdown. Tricia, welcome to Podcast Stardust.
Thanks for having me on.
So great to have you on. Definitely.
Yeah, we're absolutely thrilled to have you here. And we're going to be asking Tricia a little bit about her experience with Star Wars and then talking about this book overall, especially the first half of it in just a moment. But before we get started with that, Jay, remind everybody what our social media contacts are.
Absolutely, Dennis. We are on Facebook and Instagram, as always, at Podcast Stardust.
All right. The dish is aligned. The signal is boosted to maximum output. The shield is down. We are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So there was a bunch of reasons why we wanted to have Tricia on the show as our guest, but those reasons include that she hadn't read Darth Bane before, and she's also from a different generation than Jay and myself. I'm not even sure this book was on her radar when it came out. So we're going to get this discussion started by finding out a little bit more about your fandom, Tricia, with Star Wars. So yeah, how did you get into Star Wars? What was your introduction? We were talking a little bit before we started recording that you didn't get a chance to see the original trilogy when they were in theaters, but how did it all come about? How did you get invested in Star Wars? And because our listeners can't see this, but I'm looking at a very impressive collection behind you, and we're recording full of Ahsoka, Star Wars Lego, which is near and dear to my heart, of course. Books, Millennium Falcon, a print of Leia. There's a ton of great stuff behind you. So what is it that brought you to Star Wars, and how did that all start?
So I was born just after the original trilogy ended. And to this day, one of my favorite movies is Return of the Jedi, because I was of the age where the cute bears were an attractive feature of a movie. But since then, my love for Star Wars has grown. Back when, in like the mid 80s, there weren't a lot of like strong female characters for like girls. It was basically She-Ra and Leia were like the two people that I really connected with. So that's where my interest budded. And then I had a younger brother come along several years later, and he and I both really took to Star Wars. And so I finally had like a buddy, and we took a trip together. It was our first sibling trip to the Chicago Star Wars Celebration. It was at 2019. And from there, it just kind of exploded. I was old enough. I had grown-up money, so I could actually like spend money to start a collection. People gift me things all the time now. It's really easy to shop for me. It's basically anything Star Wars I'm happy with. So that's kind of where my love has grown out of. Unfortunately, my daughter doesn't have the same affinity for Star Wars that I do. So I have failed as a parent, but I'm still working on her. She does love going to Disney World though, and she humors me by going into Batuu every time we go, and we always ride Smuggler's Run together. Probably one of my her earliest memories. She was 4 when we took her for the first time, and she had to use the bathroom while we were waiting in line for Smuggler's Run, and they gave us a cast member out to get to a bathroom and brought us back in. So she got to see some behind the scenes there, and she thought that was pretty cool. So she does have a positive memory of a Star Wars event.
That's awesome.
That's super cool. Well, good. So since you're, I wouldn't say fairly new to Star Wars, because like we said, you're just of a different generation than we are. So, I mean, anybody that is, of your age, we consider to be relatively new, to Star Wars, because Dennis and I are of a certain age. But obviously Legends, that was previously known as Expanded Universe, was around a long time ago as compared to what your current experience is. So what was your experience with Legends / Expanded Universe before picking up this book?
Well, I'm not sure how these fall, but they had young adult novels or like youth novels about the Jedi Training Academy. And it was like Luke was the teacher, and then it was the twins, Han and Leia's twins. There was a Wookiee, and I remember he lost his arm when his lightsaber exploded. So like, I don't know if, obviously that's not canon anymore. With the new movies, there's only one son. And, but that was like where I started. And then like, honestly, a book of the size of Darth Bane, this is the first time that I've read anything outside of really what's considered canon. I have offshoots that I've read, like Scoundrels. I did read that. I'm honestly not sure what is and isn't part of the official timeline anymore. I mean, some of the things it's pretty obvious based on the movies, but I'm a person who will absorb any Star Wars content. The other thing that I did read too were like comic books way back in the day, and I know some of those are no longer like in canon as well. But I mean, I do have a little street cred because I did watch the original trilogy on VHS, so hopefully I get a few points for that.
Heck yeah. You get all kinds of points for us. That's for sure.
Yeah. No, that completely counts. Those are some fantastic selections you mentioned. I was just noticed the Scoundrels, my copy of Scoundrels sitting over here on the shelf. Before we get into Bane, one last question here. What are your favorite parts of Star Wars right now? What's your go-to? What is it that you love most about Star Wars? Your favorite characters, favorite movies? What is it that if you're sitting down to enjoy some Star Wars on a weekend, you're going to pick?
I always have Rogue One downloaded on my iPad. That is like forever lives on my iPad. Near and dear to my heart is the original trilogy because that's honestly what I grew up on. And there was a period where we had very little content. I vaguely remember watching like like reruns of the droids and like the Ewok adventures. So that was actually really fun. They were showing the Ewok adventures on a Royal Caribbean cruise that I took with my daughter in April. And she's like, "What is this?" I'm like, "It's Star Wars." And she totally got into it. So then I showed her some of the Rebuild the Galaxy, like Lego Star Wars animated stuff. And she thought that was so funny. And I'm like, okay, I think I finally got her hooked a little bit. Like we'll introduce her. But yeah, Rogue One is a huge movie for me. I don't know how many times I've watched that. Ahsoka is my favorite character. She replaced Leia. I have to say, I don't cry very much in Star Wars movies. I bawled when she walked away from the Jedi Order. That was a hard scene for me. And I, like, to this day, have a hard time watching that episode. And just that whole story arc was challenging because, as viewers, we're rooting for her and we know what's going on. But it was such a hard episode to watch. I met Ashley Eckstein on my birthday in Chicago. So and I told her, they're like, "Don't talk to them. It's a photo op." It's like, you know how it is. They're like, boom, 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 boom. I'm like, nope, I'm going to tell her it's my birthday. And then she was like, "Oh, can I give you a hug?" And I'm 5'10", So she hugged me like around my waist because that's about as tall as she was to me. So like meeting her, they say never meet your heroes, but meeting her, I'm like, that seals it. So she's such a lovely person. Um, and then I would say this sounds really weird, but the Shakespearean rewrites of the movies, I actually really enjoyed reading those. The translation of the droid beeps that like R2D2 does, I think some of those translations are just so hilarious that that's like a light read for me, and I just really had fun reading those books.
Ian Desher would be
Yeah,
happy
Ian
to hear that.
Disher. Yep.
Yeah,
I was just gonna say that's a great compliment to Ian for sure.
yeah, I love that you got to go to Celebration Chicago with your brother. That was the first place that Jay and I ever met in person.
Yes.
Was in Chicago. And we've been recording different podcasts, but we've been recording for a while together when that happened. So we've only seen each other at celebrations, and that's going to happen again next year. But that's fantastic. I love this. I love your experience, and I love that you shared all that. That's Rogue One is a fantastic movie. No surprise to anyone that listens to this show how fond we are of it here. But let's get into some Darth Bane. You just talked about, or just said that you really didn't have a whole lot of experience outside of Legends beyond, Scoundrels and some of the comics and the like. So, I remember when I posted in a Discord forum that we were going to do this, that you like jumped right on board with the experience as well as a few other people. And that was exciting. I was glad to hear that people were interested in doing this. But I also remember some comments that you texted or DM'd me after you started that. What did you think when you dove into this book? What were your first impressions of this? And did we almost lose you? Because I do remember a comment or two.
Yeah, there were early on the scene in the cave, and there's digits being removed. I was like, what am I reading? This is not my typical Star Wars that I'm used to. I mean, we should be, right? How many arms have been cut off by a lightsaber? But I read a lot more of like the fluffy stuff, like is it Queen's Peril, that trilogy, like things that don't involve biting somebody's finger off. So I'm like, I don't know what I'm getting into. But as I continued to read it, I made all my little tabs, and there's a lot of parallels between this book and things that you see on screen. And so piecing things together, I'm assuming this book came out well before a lot of the screen stuff that we've seen. And I'm curious, like, how much was drawn from Darth Bane versus, like, did they think they created it on their own? There's just so many things that are a reflection. I've always considered myself to be a light side fan. So reading something that was not that, I was a little apprehensive, but I find it really fascinating, like his story development so far. I also think what helped was watching Maul, which I didn't mention that, but that was a phenomenal season. And I've come to appreciate I don't want to say appreciate the Empire. That's not really the right sentiment, but like you can value character development and character types, even if it's not a side you're rooting for. I think Thrawn is another character from that, that side of that. He's just very fascinating. I will say, speaking of Thrawn, this book was a lot easier to read than having to understand like war tactics and maneuvers in a book. Like this is a lot more like straightforward, like action and like what's happening. So I'm glad I'm giving it a chance, because as I've continued to read it, I've really come to enjoy it. And I think that even though it's a legend, there's stuff you can take out of this book that is still applicable to the canon material. It gives you a better insight to the mind of the Sith, and it makes me appreciate things more when I go back and like rewatch a movie or watch episodes of a show. and then I bring this context in, and it makes me see things in a new light. So I appreciate that you help me push my boundaries.
Well, that's awesome. And it's funny because you just answered about 5 questions that we had in that statement, which is awesome. But, as Ahsoka would say, there's always a bit of truth in legends, right? So there's that, obviously. So you kind of answered that question as far as, what kinds of connections could you make between canon and legends? And I'm with you. There's a lot in the Legends library, expanded universe, that they've done a great job. All of the different authors have done a great job in their own way of explaining different space battles and, like you said, different war tactics, or, this, that, and the other. But sometimes a good story is what really pulls you in. There will definitely, not to give anything away, but there's going to be a lot more of that kind of stuff later on. But, at least this is giving us the groundwork for what is to come later on. So, you were talking about finding yourself rooting for Bane, right? And I know I do that too. It's like, oh my gosh, wait, he's the bad guy. And of course, Dennis and I have talked about that too, despite knowing that he's the villain. So we've talked a lot about talking, whether or not Bane is a villain that we admire. Do you think that Drew Karpyshyn ever wants us to forget that we're reading about the bad guy, or do you think that that was exactly the point in his writing?
That's a good question. I don't think he wants you to for it. I think it's kind of like if you go to a zoo and you see a tiger behind the glass, it's really easy to feel safe seeing that tiger because there's a barrier there. But in reality, like that thing could, tear you apart. And I think that's kind of the vibe you get. Like, when he's what is her name? The girl that he attaches. I can't how do you
Bethany.
pronounce her name?
Githany.
Yeah. Yeah, Githany. So I started feeling like his betrayal when she went to his foe and tried to get him killed. Like I got protective of him in my head. I'm like, no, that's not okay. You can't turn your back on people like that. But like at the same time, he went and like killed his dad. It's like he's not a good guy. So
Right, right.
I think that Drew does a really nice job of writing a very dangerous character in a way that like he still humanizes him and makes you relate to him, and like there's certain emotional aspects. We've all maybe not had a huge like gambling debt that we can't pay off on a mining colony, but we've all been in a situation at some point in our lives where it feels really dire, and we can understand how he's feeling and that he feels trapped in that instance. So he did a masterful job of writing like the human aspect of Bane as a character. And
Mhm.
I don't think he ever wanted us to like I think it was intentional, and I think he was trying to draw you in to like want to root for the character because he shows these like human components of Bane.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's well said. Absolutely. And I have one other follow-up question, Dennis, for Trisha, and then I'll let you take over here because I've always been completely enamored with Des/Bane as well. And I don't know what it is about his character. He's charismatic in a lot of the same ways that Maul is.
Mhm.
Maul is just so velvet in his ways. D- Des is a lot more, Bane is a lot more, to borrow from his upbringing on Apatros, he hammers things home. You know what I mean? So he's a little different in that way. But I guess my follow-up question to you is, do you think that Bane is chasing power? Is he proving his worth? Or is he just simply trying to build something better given his upbringing and his experiences on Apatros?
I think he's chasing understanding. Like the fact that he left the academy and he went to the catacombs to look for answers, and he like used the archives as like text reference and could tell that like they're doing it wrong. The brotherhood isn't how the Sith is supposed to function. And even though me personally, I'm all about like building a team. And so I think that's part of the reason why I gravitate more towards the light side of characters. There's there's rationale that he's able to identify in like just having two, and the way that the ancients taught how to be a Sith. So I think he's seeking understanding. I also think that I don't know if it's necessarily power. I get the sense he understands he's powerful. They talk about his presence. He's a large person in general, like just physically, but I think he's looking for purpose. And I think through so far where we're at in the book, he's starting to realize that he has the ability to have purpose beyond just being kind of the deadbeat miner, son of a miner kind of thing.
Mhm.
And I think that again, that I'm a sucker for personal growth in a character, and I think that's something too that draws you in. So for me, I don't think he's looking for power. I think he's looking for purpose.
In
Gotcha.
in a sea of Sith who've done despicable things, he's our protagonist who's probably the most relatable because we have the most inner thoughts and what motivates him, by comparison to the likes of Gethany, Sirac, Lord Kopej, Kasim, any of those other Sith are out there. So I think you nailed it. I think is the TLDR version of what I was just trying to say. But moving on a little bit, and we'll have other opportunities to talk about Bane. I have to laugh because the first question Jay wrote about Githany is another female Star Wars fan, which I am not. But how do you interpret this character? What is your reaction to this character? And the reason why I ask is that as a man, sometimes I get a bit uncomfortable reading about this character who is described as drop dead gorgeous. You've got men all around her drooling over themselves in her presence and attempting to essentially mark her as territory. That's my perception a lot of times what's happened in this book. Meanwhile, she frequently uses this to her advantage. She knows what she's got. She knows how people react to her, and she doesn't shy away from it. She doesn't resent it. She uses it. But that's easy for me to say, as I mean, of the three of us here, I can probably least relate to any of this. But Jay and I've talked a little bit before, but I'd be interested to get your reaction to Gethany as a character.
I think she's dangerous. I don't like her. I value like honesty and being faithful to people that you've kind of aligned with, and you pretty much know up front that she's in it for herself. She's not one to really hide that much. I don't like that she's manipulative, but she's smart too. Like she knows how to play the game, so to speak. I find it hard to believe that anyone would ever have accepted her into the Jedi Order, though, because she's kind of a despicable person when you boil it down. And I'm like, how? Well, that was a mistake. So, and I value like people's brains over their like appearance. And so I don't like female characters where it's this trope where it's like they use their body to get, their way with things. Or I know for her, she's also kind of using it as a mask to hide the fact that she is bright. Like she knows how to work people. But I don't like that. She rubs me the wrong way. So
Yeah, and I've often, asked if she was written as a male character, how would we look at her as being different? Because you mentioned manipulative, and I think that that's part of what the Sith are. They are manipulative to a point. Kopej and Khan and Cortus, they all kind of breathe this brotherhood thing, and that it's like all for one and one for all. But is it really? And so, I often wonder if that would really be different if she was written as a man. But I think in some ways, I think she wants people to, underestimate her and use that kind of pretty privilege to blind people from what she's actually doing. How would you respond to that?
I can see that. Um, I think it shows how good she is at manipulation because she can get people so quickly to turn in favor of what she wants them to do. And I think it was interesting too, even with Bane, you read his inner thoughts, and he's like, he says so much in the book, he knows he's being manipulated to some extent by her. Like, he's aware of that, and yet it doesn't stop him. So she has a level of charisma that people are drawn towards. So she's crafty.
Yeah. I appreciated Sirach's response to her in the last couple chapters that we covered on the show, which was she shows up as he's getting out of the back to tank, and he's like been contemplating where he is, how he ended up in the back tank, maybe whether he deserved it. No one came to see him, and then she shows up, and he's like, "Yeah, I know about her. She's the one that uses her feminine wiles to try and get people to do what they want." And now she's flipping from being a Bane supporter to suddenly backing me. But despite all of that he's not falling for her looks, she still manages to convince him that they're going to be able to set up Bane and do something about that. So, yeah, despite what I said earlier, that again, it makes me feel a little uncomfortable, with the way that she manages to, the way the men react to her, I guess is what it is, and the way that she's been portrayed in the book. I still do appreciate, as you were suggesting, that she has these other skills that she knows, like, oh, plan A didn't work, fall back on plan B, which is appealing to his desire to avenge himself against Bane. She knows exactly what Sirach wanted. So if you got anything else you want to say about Githany, you're certainly welcome to do so, but I do want to kind of move it on to some of the other things that happen in this book.
I do have one question,
Sure.
and I want your opinion. Do you think that part of her force abilities is the ability to read people and kind of like know what their desires are and then play on those? Or is she just really good in general at reading people?
That's a good question. What do you think, Joe?
That is a good question. I think, there's so many different force abilities out there. And in Legends, I mean, there was basically the sky's the limit, as far as what people could do. And I mean, I guess it's true in canon as well. I've often likened her to Asajj Ventress in some ways, in that she knows what she's got and she's going to use it, kind of thing. But as far as being able to read the room, I don't know if that's necessarily a force ability, or, as you were saying, just the fact that she is very cunning, and she's very smart. I mean, she's kind of at that level where she can pick apart and dissect how things are going to move and flow, and kind of see 3 steps beyond where she is now, and almost like a flow chart in her head kind of thing, where she could say, okay, if this doesn't happen, then I'll do this. And if this happens, then okay, then I'll go over here. So I'm not really sure if it's necessarily a force ability, or if it's just that she is just that good at just being able to do those kinds of things, almost like an empath, but not like a weird empath, kind of thing. But what do you think, Dennis?
I'm still considering it, and I don't know that I have a good answer to that question. If it's not a force ability, it probably has a lot to do with her experience with people that are talented with the force, and the fact that she spends a lot of time talking about her experience with the Jedi and how she had a lover there, and that the Jedi frowned on all this. And that's what drove, part of the reason, I should say, that she left the Jedi and joined the Sith, is that her experience dealing with the Jedi, they're focused on the Force, they're focused on communing with it, understanding its will, protecting the galaxy, and then they deny themselves. They deny themselves partnership. They deny themselves attachment. And she sees an opportunity at the Sith, because she takes that, I'm rambling, but she takes that to another level, which is that she can find personal growth there. She can pursue personal ambition there in a way that she couldn't with the Jedi. And I think that's born out of some of this that you're saying. So maybe the Force enhances it if it isn't some talent with the Force, but her experience with all these talented Force users, both on the Jedi and the Sith, I think have led her to at least develop that ability, if it's not. But what do you think, Tricia?
That's why I asked you.
Fair enough. Okay.
All right. Well, let's move on to some other characters here, and also some other themes. But let's talk about themes. So, has this book changed how you view the Sith versus what we have in canon, and then what this particular framing device, jumping obviously 1,000 years before, as Maul would say, at last we will reveal ourselves to the Jedi, at last we will have revenge. So that's been building since potentially what this set up, but yet there's obviously a Legends versus canon difference. So again, has this changed how you view the Sith?
I feel like Maul might be tainting my full view of the book because I'm reading it as the series aired, and like you got to see aspects of his training from when he was really young, and he was treated pretty cruelly. That I always had like you I love that they're building his character out more with everything that they do with him. And I was kind of shocked, but I shouldn't have been, when he's having like these kind of like flashbacks and then the hallucinations and everything, and you see that he's like, they're pretty harsh. And then in the book they throw them against each other, in a essentially almost to the death, and in some cases for Bane to the death, situations against each other. And I find it kind of interesting that they're talking about this brotherhood and they're trying to build up their numbers to face the Jedi, yet then they pit one another against each other, and then they tell them, okay, you fought each other, you have resentment, and now you have to all get along. And I'm like, I feel like that's just setting them up for failure. So I there's some things in the book that made me kind of like actually really think about how the Sith teachings. And that's something too. There are a lot of like italicized sentences and stuff that go right back to the teachings. And like he's got mantras that he says. And some of them are really interesting concepts. I like underline them and I'm like, interesting. So I think the thing that's hard about this book is that it's not the true like way that the Sith practice in general, right? Like this was a trial that I'm guessing ultimately fails based on what I know of the Sith. So I think it's interesting though that they strayed from like the rule of two and they're trying this new concept, which ultimately will fail based on what we know about canon materials. But it's not something that I thought the Sith was really would really ever try. And my bias for the light side, I never really thought the Sith were like creative, maybe like cunning or manipulative, but like there's creativity built into like how they're trying to do things. And again, there's that humanizing piece of Bane, and so it's making me see them in a different light than when I was 4 years old and I was watching the Ewok hit a stormtrooper with a stone, and I'm like, they're just the bad guys. All of them are the bad guys. And this, there's like, okay, there's depth to these bad guys. So I do appreciate that about the book.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm. And what is your come straight to theme things? Because I want to ask about, Bane's got these various Sith mentors throughout the book. You've got Kasim, who's the weapons trainer. You've got Lord Khan, you've got Cordis and the others and like that. Is there any of them that you found particularly interesting, or anything that they said or did resonated with you, or what do you think about these various Sith masters that have kind of been floating around in the background of this book?
I like Kasim the best out of all of them. I feel like he's the one that has the most patience when working with Bane. I don't like Cordis at all. To me, he comes across as being like very traditionally Sith, like very arrogant, just kind of ruthless. So I don't particularly care for people who have that type of personality. But I thought it was just kind of a novel concept that there's like people who have specialties versus what we're so used to, where the master had all the answers that he was willing to supply to his apprentice. And as we know from previous pairings, masters don't always tell you everything. And I do think that's part of too why Bane is he's looking for more, and that's why he goes to the archives. And I think he realizes that each of these specialties only can train him so far, and he wants to be that master of all. So I think like having connections with each of these individuals shaped him throughout this whole thing. Like I thought it was rather cruel for them to just be like, yeah, go and check out these catacombs or whatever. And essentially it's like, yeah, he's going to die. Like, I'm like, well, that's not good. So,
Oh,
yeah,
exactly.
but Cardiff is my favorite. I like that he's patient enough and he's willing to give his time. And the fact that my parents are both teachers, and the fact that he like trains with him and they're both sweating at the end of their sessions, like he's putting as much effort into this as Bane is. And I value that in educators.
Yeah, like Kasim's not going to do anything that he's not asking Bane to do anything he wouldn't do himself. And that's often, and I think, I'm a retired teacher myself, and that's something that I always prided myself on as well. So I think that's why I gravitate toward Kasim as well. So I can see how that would be, especially having parents as educators, someone that resonates with you for sure. So I have to ask you though, you mentioned earlier that you're more of the, the light side kind of follower. So we haven't really seen much of the Jedi so far. I mean, they've been sort of on the fringes of everything that's been happening, and they're sort of the thorn in the side of the Sith. So how do you feel about the way that the Jedi have been framed so far? And do you have any predictions going forward?
Well, one of the earlier things that stood out to me, and it wasn't specifically the Jedi, but when the lieutenant or the cadets were on what is the home
Patros.
planet? Yes.
Apatros,
And
yeah.
they it was very dishonorable for them to try and like tag team him in the dark. And he has these force like awareness to know where they were located, but it didn't paint the light side in a very, very well. And then you hear bits and pieces about General Hoth, and granted it's coming from his opponents, but he's not written as like a very favorable character from what I've read so far. I know there's more than just this one book, right, of the Bane series. So I don't know where it's going to go. I mean, obviously we know in the end the brotherhood has to dissolve at some point, but I just don't know yet. I
Fair
want to
enough.
know.
That's
What?
fair. That's totally
Yeah.
fair.
You brought up the his experience in Apatros, but then the next big chapter in his life was when he was in the Sith army. He was a soldier. He hadn't been identified as force sensitive yet. What did you think about those? I mean, you don't need to dip into themes or anything like that, but just he escaped the mining colony on Apatro for this promise of a life where he could make his own way based on his own strength. But then things happened while he was in the army. What did you think about those chapters?
I thought it was interesting that they use the term gloom walkers, and we have like Luke Skywalker, like kind of an echo of the two sides there. And like I liked the vision of that, where like they come out of like the fog or whatever, and you don't necessarily see them. I thought it was really interesting, and I think it ties into a part of his character where like his men were faithful to him. Like they followed him even though he like knocked out a commanding officer. And there was a part where he's getting up, like angering the cadets and lieutenant in the gambling, when they're gambling. And the bartender, whose name escapes me because this is only my first time reading this book, so I apologize, he makes a comment about how like Bane was building up their anger. He was making it worse, and I don't think he was intentionally doing it, but I think it was his force powers that were like escalating it to the level that they were at. So I very much got the impression that he inadvertently was like influencing the people around him earlier in the book. And I'm curious to see where this goes, like later on, because they're getting to this point where they are going to come to a head with the battle against the Jedi, and I'm curious to see how things evolve, because he's kind of like, I'm out. Like, this isn't how the Sith are supposed to be. So I wonder how his character is going to continue to develop, and how his interactions with the Jedi are going to be now that he really isn't buying into the Brotherhood anymore.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I always liked Groshek too. He was always a standout character, the bartender. Yeah, I
Yeah.
always liked it. For me, he was almost like the inverse of Dex, Dexter's Diner, Obi-Wan's like Obi-Wan kind of thing. And this is Groshek, and that was sort of his little Dex in that way. But yeah.
Yeah, he's at the end of the day, we all can depend on ourselves guy. That I think
Right.
is
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
first
Mhm.
implant that leads to that whole rule too. Okay, so we got about 10 minutes left here. And one of the things that Jade noted here that I'd really be curious about, was there anything that's happened in this book that, as you've been listening to our recaps, you've been surprised we haven't brought up or discussed?
Like anything we've
I-
overlooked, like you're like, oh, I wanted them to talk about this, because we're so familiar with the story that sometimes it's easy for us to gloss over it. So what do you think?
what I've noticed is that when I'm reading it, if I see a similarity with something that's one of my, like, I had mentioned to Dennis before we were recording that Rebels was the first animated show that I watched. So I find myself comparing a lot of what I read to my favorite types of Star Wars screen based media. And I feel like there are components of Ezra that mirror what we see in Bane at times. And I mean, that's just me specifically. Like, I tend to gravitate, like I said, towards comparing my favorite things to what I'm reading in the book. But like, you don't know me. You wouldn't you wouldn't know to talk about how Rebels and Bane are similar in any vein. So
I'm actually
I think you
fascinated
guys,
by that comparison, though.
Yeah,
That's
me too.
because
Honestly.
I'm thinking back to that second and third season of Rebels, mainly the second, where like he comes into contact with Maul and he comes into contact with the holocrons and stuff like that, and he's looking for power to defend his friends. And we were doing a completely different podcast at the time, Jay. We've
Yeah.
since redone all those episodes and a rewatch on this podcast, but the being concerned that Ezra was going to make a bad choice and do something dark side related, and that he was going to fall victim to these dark side musings from Maul along the way, and that get some guidance from the dark side, go beyond what the Jedi teach, in not a good way, not a Luke Skywalker, not a Rey Skywalker type of a way, but in a detrimental type of a way. So that's not really that outrageous a comparison, Tricia.
Mhm.
I actually pretty fascinated by that. I'm gonna have to think about that one some more.
There's
well,
always, some poetry rhyming going on, with Star Wars.
well, I was gonna say too, like, they're both orphans essentially. And just like I had mentioned, like, I feel like Bane has the ability to kind of influence people around him. Ezra really had that ability with animals. So it's kind of a similar use of the Force. So it's just things like that that kind of stuck out to me.
Mhm.
All right. Well, Jay, why don't we get into a few of these lightning round questions here, and we can go ahead and wrap this up.
All right. So, Trisha, who would you say is your favorite character in the book, and why?
I think I'd have to say Bane, just because Drew does a really nice job humanizing him and makes him more relatable. And I'm not gonna lie, there are things he does in the book, I'm like, man, there are days when I feel that. So,
I'm going to combine two of these because Jay, you have favorite chapter and like favorite quote or scene, and I think it's a little hard to
Yeah,
necessarily pick out a chapter here.
fair.
But
Mhm.
do you have a favorite scene, favorite moment from the book? And if so, what is it?
I it sounds weird, but I liked when he overcame his self-doubt and he was able to like tap back into his powers. It's kind of like weirdly rooting for him to be an even stronger bad guy. So I like that he was able to overcome that, and that there was, I don't know if you really want to call it a hero's journey because it would be a very short one, but like to survive going out and not finding the answers and then coming back and like, coming full circle where he's able to face his foe and be strong again. Like it's like a mini hero's journey. So I liked that, like that arc, if you want to call it that, in the book.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So you talked about some of the scenes that were shocking to you, some of the violence and that type of thing. Is there something else that was more, I don't know if I want to necessarily say shocking, but was kind of an aha moment for you where you're like, "Oh, that's really interesting," kind of thing?
I I don't know if there was like a moment. It's
Mhm.
more like an awakening of an awareness to the Sith.
Mhm.
Whereas before, I would just kind of go out of my way to avoid really learning anything about them. This book has made me actually take a good look at that, and that honestly, there's a lot of similarities between both sides, um, and just how they. I mean, we know that there's similarities, but I feel like this book delves into it a little bit more. And I think it's a little more comparable because it is like a group of essentially Padawans training under select masters. So it's like it's a little more comparing apples to apples. So I think it's a better way of seeing like how the Sith do what the Jedi do, but in their own interpretation. And that's not something you get to see very much. So I think it just in general, it's expanded my view of just the Sith in general.
Mhm. Palpatine would be very proud of you.
I
If
don't know
one
if
is
that's a
to
compliment.
understand the Force, one must study all of its aspects, right? Love
All
it.
right. So this is this book has kind of been a new experience for you, and you've primarily your fandom's been based in the shows, the movies, and the like. Despite the comics and some of the other books you've read. But what do you think? Would this be something that you would recommend to other Star Wars fans that haven't dipped their toes as far into Legends and some of the other materials that are out there?
I think so. It's different than a lot of other media that's available that I'm aware of. He's a really cool character, and I'm sad that I hope they bring him in at some point. I would love for him to be canon. And if he is and I don't know about it, I'm sorry. there's a
Mm.
lot of there's a lot of things to consume in the Star Wars universe.
Oh yeah, there
Um
sure is.
I think it's a like I would not give this book to my daughter because she's 12, but she did just
Sure.
finish watching Stranger Things. So I don't know, maybe I would give it to her at this point. Um, I think what I would do is if someone is interested in reading Star Wars and they've watched Maul and they enjoyed that, I would recommend this book
Mm.
because I feel like it's a very similar vibe.
Mhm. Well,
I
that's
like that.
totally fair.
Yeah.
And hopefully you'll stick with us for the other 2 books as well. Hopefully we'll be able to do
Oh,
those on the show.
I I'm hooked now. I have to know what happens to this guy. So I'm
Yay.
in.
For what it's
Awesome.
worth, my oldest was 13 when he read this book and was utterly fascinated, tore through it, and then the second and the third book right after it. And so we had a lot of fun discussions about that. A little different than I think what your daughter's level of interest in Star Wars is. So I think it'd be a harder sell for her based on what you've said. But yeah, it's anyway. Jay, you want to go ahead and finish out with our last question here?
Oh yeah. So if Drew Karpyshyn were sitting here right now, Trisha, what is one question you would love to ask him?
why why choose Bane? What drew him to a Sith character versus a Jedi character versus just a scoundrel? What made him such an appealing character to develop?
Mhm.
I
I
like
like
it.
that. I would
All
like
right.
to know the answer to that as well.
Yeah. Having followed his career probably a little bit closer, I think I have the hints to that question, but I'm not going to
Mhm.
say that on this show because we have other things that we need to discuss before we get to the end of the book. But Tricia, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. It's been fantastic. I loved hearing your perspective as someone who's new to all this. As Jay was saying earlier, we've read these books 3, 4, 5 times a piece, or Jay, I think even more than that. And so, it's one of those things that we've thought a lot about, but it's hard to remember that first time perspective. So I really appreciated getting that from you this time around.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Of course. All right. Well, then, with that, I want to say thank you all for joining us for the episode of Podcast Stardust and this discussion of Darth Bane. We hope you've enjoyed it. And if you want to get our ongoing discussion of this book as we finish it up by the end of the year, make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your podcatcher of choice. We're pretty much available everywhere. And then if you want to get more episodes of the show beyond what's going to be available on your podcatcher, head over to retrozapp.com. All previous 1,060 some odd shows, I lost track where we are available over there as well as on YouTube. And Jay will remind you of that here in just a second. We appreciate your likes, ratings, reviews, where it is that you record your podcast. And with that, Jay, remind everybody where we can be found on social media and across the internet.
Absolutely, Dennis. It's my pleasure as always. So we are very conveniently found on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust on those socials. And we also have our Pinterest board, so you can hit us up for all kinds of fun ideas for everything Star Wars. And we also have other outlets where you can catch the show as well. So you can go to YouTube and YouTube Music, Spotify, Apple Music, Audible, basically anywhere that you have a podcatcher, we should be there. And if you'd like to drop us a line, especially if it's something that doesn't fit super tidily into, is tidily a word? I don't know. It is now. Into one of the social media DMs and such, you can email us at podcaststardust@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode or any others. And then if you'd like to snag yourself some Podcast Stardust merch, you can hit up the link in our show notes, and that'll take you to our TeePublic store. And we do have 7 different show logo designs available on all kinds of fun things, from t-shirts and sweatshirts to coffee mugs, and even things like ball caps, socks, workout wear, all kinds of stuff. They used to have baby onesies, and I'm really sad that they don't have those anymore. So I'm going to have to make some of my own on a Cricut so my granddaughter can wear them. But anyways, please go to our TeePublic store. Link in our show notes.
I'm laughing because you always used to end the
I know.
TeePublic plug with the baby onesies that were
And
over
then they
there.
took them away.
And now you finally mentioned them again after all this time. Tricia, you have a fantastic podcast talking about theme parks, especially in the Orlando area. Where can people find that, and whatever else is that you're doing?
I am at Theme Park Throwdown on Instagram and Facebook. And then I have a personal account called Tricia Travels on Facebook and Instagram as well. And it's just kind of adventures that I do either by myself or with my family. We were recently in Toronto, and we went to Canada's Wonderland, which is their version of Six Flags. So I'll just post things in there. I'm also a huge fan of the Run Disney community. So lately I've been posting the virtual summer series that I've been doing, and I'll be posting my August run here in the very near future.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
And so, yeah, definitely go check out her podcast. That's a great comparison between the Disney theme parks and what's going on with Universal. And they debate a topic every week. And I've been enjoying listening to it. I know nothing about Universal, and I've been learning a lot about that. But Tricia is always championing Disney and does a fantastic job. I'm a huge fan. So that's how we got to know each other. Okay, upcoming on the show on Friday, we'll be getting into the week's Star Wars news. I'm not sure how much there will be because we'll just discussed San Diego Comic-Con news last week. And then on Monday, I guess we'll be getting into The Ninth Jedi. It just occurred to me that that's coming out about the same time that this episode is. So look for our breakdown of that. But with that, I just want to say thanks for listening to episode 1067 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. And until next time, may the Force be with you.